This is a follow-up video to the importance of ports, where I briefly discussed why it's worth checking out your favourite DOS games on other systems, as they may well have been improved upon or have been the definitive version of the title in the first place. I've also talked about the importance of open source gaming too in the past, so those unfamiliar with the channel may want to watch those two videos first, as I've made my feelings clear on both matters. I love open source, I love source ports, and I love game remakes. I use them, and I think they're an important part of preserving a classic for future players to enjoy. This is not an uncommon opinion, to say the least. People love when their favourites get resurrected with a fresh coat of paint for modern systems, so long as it's done with care and attention and a clear love and knowledge of the game in question. A source port is where the original source code of the game engine and some or all of its core assets are taken and planted into an updated version of the same engine, or in many cases a new engine altogether. This permits it to run on computers that it wasn't designed to, usually the modern ones, or different operating systems like Linux and Windows instead of DOS. This is different from emulation, which tries to create an equivalent environment for the game in question to run on, tricking it into thinking it's running on the hardware it was designed for, but without changing the core game itself. Total conversions take one game and turn it into another, completely changing most or all the assets so that it looks like something else, but plays roughly the same under the hood. This can be an original idea, someone else's intellectual property, or even a spin-off or unofficial sequel to the original game. It can also be an older game recreated in the engine of a newer game in the series, but these are often instead called remakes. Remakes are when the design ideas of a game are recreated in an updated or entirely different engine. They might use some of the original assets or none at all, but they don't tend to use the source code of the original unless it's by happy coincidence of the updated engine sharing some code commonality with the older one. Instead, they spend their time rewriting their update to perform like the original, but with certain enhancements or caveats. These are regularly called remasters these days, but the lines start to blur excessively depending on what is done in the process of remastering an old game. Outcast is a really good example of this blurring. It's a third-person action-adventure game from 1999, a precursor to all the hopeless dreck we see from the likes of Ubisoft these days, only done with heart, and in a time when such games were new and exciting. It was a pioneer in its genre and fondly remembered, despite being somewhat clunky to play now. Flash forward to 2014 and Outcast received the 1.1 upgrade. This recompiled the source code of the original to run on modern systems, offering widescreen support and various other enhancements, which technically makes it a source port and a remaster. Big deal. Why's that blurry? Well, in 2017, Appeal remade Outcast in the Unity engine. So this was a remake of a remastered source port, except it wasn't just a remake, as source code from the original game was used. By using a Unity plugin to keep the old game running in the background, they were able to build new assets and a new user interface that could be layered over the top of the old game. So in addition to experiencing various other quality of life tweaks, what you're doing when you play it is essentially running a high definition texture pack over the top of a 1.1 source port. So Outcast Second Contact is a remake, a remaster, and a source port of the original game into the Unity engine all rolled into one. Whatever you choose to call it, and however you slice it, this kind of resurrection is good for gaming. Whether it's something as simple as a widescreen patch and a few bug fixes, or something as complex as completely recreating the game in a different engine, the efforts of the community have been noticed and developers have started to follow suit. Digital patches for old games that provide official widescreen support rather than community hacks, re-releases that uncap frame rates and improve assets, and entire companies whose sole purpose in life is to recreate the past but bring much needed updates, so that the games in question look and play as well as our hazy memories recall them to be. But resurrecting those old IPs for digital consumption is a minefield of legal red tape, with regards to who now owns what. GOG, formerly known as Good Old Games, led the charge by convincing a host of companies to re-release their titles on its site. A large chunk of the games were DOS-based and bundled with DOSBox to varying amounts of success. But there was a number of them that ran on earlier versions of Windows, where compatibility was much more difficult. This led their in-house team of developers to fix the games outright, often including fan patches with permission when they proved the best solution. The most prominent of the companies that deal almost exclusively in resurrecting the past are a team called NightDive Studios. Much like GOG, they obtain the rights to classic games no longer on the market, often updating them for compatibility with modern platforms, or outright porting them into better engines before re-releasing them into digital distribution. Recently, they've been porting a series of first-person games into the Kex engine, like System Shock, Blood, Strife, Forsaken, Turok, and even games never to grace the PC like Doom 64. It's good stuff for the most part, and though I don't know the legal or financial ins and outs of the process, I sincerely hope that the original developers are appropriately compensated for having their work back online to purchase. I regularly bemoan the increasing homogenization of modern gaming and controls, but there were certain schemes that were gradually standardized for a reason. Offering this modern way to experience the game while still making allowances for the original is a great way for developers to endear themselves to the gaming public. Of course, you can't please everyone. There will always be a tiny subsection of purists that are unhappy that the game is being touched at all, or they find out that it doesn't adhere to exactly how they wanted it to be. They can take a running jump back to their original floppies or CDs, and the rest of us can enjoy the fruits of these glorious labours to recreate the past. I've seen firsthand while working on the TFTC project that there are a number of players who never experienced the first game or the game it's built on top of. They just saw Star Wars game and thought, cool, I'll check this out. And that's a good thing because the community efforts are exposing the work of the original game to a wider audience. With the ever-increasing rise of retro, more and more gamers will be looking back to the past triumphs. And just like restoring a faded painting to display prominently in a museum, the huge community of paid and unpaid fixers of old games should be praised. Between digital antiquarians backing up the originals for posterity, and this bold new age of retro recreation, it's a wonderful time both for those people sick of the present and wanting to sink back into the glorious memories of the past, and those who aren't quite fond of modern gaming anymore and want to see what the fuss was with all these old titles in the first place.